So do you want to smell like Louis Vuitton without spending that LV money? Well, I got you covered with these two. Hey, what's going on? Hunter here and welcome back to my channel where I upload weekly fragrance content. So of course, go ahead, hit the subscribe button down below if you love fragrances, and also make sure to follow me over on my Instagram page. But today we are doing a review of two fragrances from the house of Alexandria Fragrances. One of the most popular cologne inspired by houses that is on the market currently, and they usually never disappoint, at least from what I've tried from them. And the two I have in my hand, of course, is two Louis Vuitton inspired by fragrances. The first one is Shave Nomad, and with the name like that, of course, you already know it is inspired by Nomade. One of my favorite Louis Vuittons, hands down. Of course, I have a bottle right over there, perfect for the colder weather. And then the second one is Into the Woods, which is inspired by Louis Vuitton's Orage, also one of my favorites, which is a little bit underrated. And of course, we'll go ahead and see if these actually are comparable to those Louis Vuittons at a fraction of the price. So let's go over some information. Now, of course, I do want to let you know that these were sent over for review by the guys over at Alexandria Fragrances, so shout out to them. And I do have a discount code, even though I'm not sure if it's working anymore. It is Hunter15, and that will save you 15% off at checkout on anything on the website. If it's not working, I will get in contact with them about that. So you actually can get these in 3 different sizes. The first size is a 30 ml for $44.99, or you can get the 60 ml like I actually have in hand with both of these for $69.99, or you can get the big boy, the 100 ml for $119.99. So those prices are absolutely reasonable, especially when you compare these to, of course, the Louis Vuittons. Louis Vuitton, especially Orage, goes for $320 for 100 ml. And now Nomade goes for $415 for the 100 ml. So of course, compare $119 to $415. And also the great thing about Alexandria Fragrances is all their fragrances are actually an extrait de parfum, which means the highest of perfume oils used in fragrances. So these are going to be potent. They are most likely going to last long as well, compared to Louis Vuittons are actually eau de parfums. They do have an extrait line, but they are like $550 for those, which is very, very pricey. And let's look at the bottles really quick, because honestly, I think these are by far the best looking bottles when it comes to clone houses or inspired by houses. They do come in this blue glass. It's kind of like a nice pillar with a gold cap with the Alexandria logo on the top. Of course, you have the sticker with the information 60 ml extrait de parfum, nothing on the bottom. And these caps are metal. They are very, very heavy. They don't necessarily click into place, but they do hold on by friction very snugly, so you actually can't pick it up confidently that your bottle is not going to fall and break. And also, I'm not able to find the boxes, but the boxes are very high quality, kind of similar to like something from a Tom Ford Private Blends when it comes to the texture and the way it lifts off. So Alexandria Fragrances was not messing around when it comes to the presentation with these. So let's go ahead and go over Into the Woods first, which is obviously inspired by Orage, which, like I said earlier, is criminally underrated from Louis Vuitton. One of my favorites. So let's spray this and test out the atomizer. Not honestly the best atomizer, does shoot kind of narrow, but of course gets the job done. And at the end of the day, that's all that matters, as long as you get the juice on you. So Into the Woods, when I first got these in, I didn't know exactly what he was sending out to me. And I didn't really know the names. Of course, I was like, Into the Woods, what could this be? I sprayed it, I was like, yep, that is Orage without a doubt. Because of course, Shave Nomad, you obviously know that is Nomade. This one though, the name is pretty different, but I do like the concept of the name, and it smells exactly like it says. Because Orage is gonna be your very earthy, dry, green fragrance. It does get kind of compared to Terre Hermes by Hermes. I do see the similarities, especially when I went to the Saks Fifth Avenue and tested them side by side. I was like, okay, yeah, I do see where they're coming from with that Terre Hermes DNA. Even though it is a little bit more earthy, and I much prefer Orage over Terre Hermes personally, because I'm a patchouli lover, and this is gonna be a patchouli bomb like through and through. But in the opening of Into the Woods, you are gonna get a very like bitey green bergamot note. That dries down to a very earthy, dry vetiver, almost a smoky vetiver actually. And that's the beauty about vetivers. Vetiver can smell a million different ways. It could be wet, it could be dry, it could be earthy, it could be smoky, it could be green. Just so many complexities when it comes to that note. In here though is dry and smoky. And then the main show, in my opinion, is that green, earthy patchouli. Man, Orage is one of my favorite patchouli fragrances. Anytime I'm in the mood for a patchouli, a lot of times I will pull for Orage. And if you didn't know, Orage actually means thunderstorm in French, and it definitely has that kind of vibe. Like you're maybe walking through a forest or into the woods, perhaps with the Alexandria name. It's kind of like rained outside. You're getting all the earthiness that comes with that, the greenness of the forest or the woods. It is also a very woody dry down. I think it has the isoe super molecule, which is of course a synthetic molecule that smells like woods, and a lot of times it kind of gives off a cedar wood vibe, and you definitely get that in here. But when it comes to the differences of Into the Woods and Louis Vuitton's Orage, of course this one is going to be much more synthetic. It's not as high quality as Orage. That one actually does come across, or actually all Louis Vuittons come across very natural smelling in my opinion. Of course, the master perfumer made those, Jacques Cavalier, one of my favorite perfumers of all time. I talk about him quite a bit actually because he's made so many of my favorite fragrances like Tuscan Leather, Bulgari, Tiger, of course, and all the Louis Vuitton fragrances. But this actually nails the scent profile about maybe a 90% similar. Like I said earlier, when I smelled this, it immediately reminded me of Orage. So you are gonna smell like Louis Vuitton Orage without a doubt. Honestly, like the only main difference between the two is the opening. With that bergamot note in Orage, you're gonna get a much more natural, juicy, zesty bergamot. This one though is a little bit subdued, not as pronounced or dominating in the scent profile before it starts to transition into like the vetiver, the patchouli, and that isoe super. But still, being over like 3 times less money to get Into the Woods compared to Orage. A lot of people don't want to spend obviously over $300 for a bottle. With tax, you're looking around 350 bucks now for the 100 ml. And those prices are always going up, which I'm not a fan of. And I'm a big fan of the Louis Vuitton brand, but those prices, like I said in all the reviews, are getting ridiculous. So I don't blame a lot of you guys for not wanting to pay that for Louis Vuitton, and you want to kind of get that same vibe, you want to smell like that, you cannot go wrong with Into the Woods, especially if you're a fan of Orage or just a fan of patchouli vetiver fragrances in general. Fantastic. When it comes to the performance, it's actually on par with Orage because Orage is actually one of the better performing freshies from Louis Vuitton. I know Alexandria colognes like Afternoon Swim, On the Beach, which I do actually have it as well. And I think like all the Louis Vuittons, if I'm not mistaken, and a lot of Louis Vuittons do not perform good like those cologne, freshie summer fragrances. That Alexandria fragrances perform even better. This one though is about on par with Orage. So it smells nearly identical, about that 90% range. It performs fantastic, on par with Orage. And at that entry level cost, you literally cannot go wrong. And a lot of times I will reach for these Alexandria fragrances over Louis Vuitton, especially if I'm just going to work and not really around many people or not like a special event. Now let's go ahead and talk about No Shave for Nomad. So if I'm being honest, No Shave for Nomad actually kind of blew me away the first time I sprayed this. So let's test out the atomizer. Of course, same exact atomizer, not the greatest, but this scent profile, whoa. Like I said earlier, a big fan of Ombre Nomad, and man, oh man, this is nearly spot on. I mean, honestly, it's hard to justify me reaching for my bottle of Ombre Nomad, especially being $400 now, over this one, because when I want that scent profile, this one gets it nearly identical. If you're not familiar with the scent profile of Ombre Nomad, it is considered like a rose oud fragrance. However, for me personally, I get much more raspberry than rose. It's very fruity, very earthy, smoky, woody, just all the good things in that fragrance. And it's actually either my favorite fragrance from Louis Vuitton or my second favorite. And I do own, I think, 13 Louis Vuitton bottles over there, which is crazy to think about. So with No Shave for Nomad, you're absolutely gonna be able to detect the Ombre Nomad DNA. Of course, it smells almost pretty much identical. I would say about 95% similar, a little bit more similar than Into the Woods compared to Orage. This one gets it even more spot on. But to break it down for you, it opens up very fruity from that dark raspberry note. And raspberry is probably my favorite fruit when it comes to fragrances. Of course, raspberries used in Tuscan Leather, one of my favorite leather fragrances. It's also used in Tumi's 19 Degree, one of the best releases of 2023. So I'm a big fan of raspberry. It's very fruity in here. And believe it or not, the raspberry in No Shave for Nomad is actually more prominent than Ombre Nomad. I get much more fruitiness from this, which isn't actually necessarily a bad thing. It actually could be even better in a lot of people's opinion to get more raspberry in this one compared to the original. Yeah, just a very like jammy raspberry. Like you just grabbed raspberries and squeezed the juice out of it. That's the kind of vibe I get in this opening. And then as it dries down, you're starting to get the smoky incense that comes through. That's really resinous, very warming. And then in the base, of course, you have that oud. Now, the oud is definitely earthy in this one. However, the Ombre Nomade DNA itself isn't really a barnyardy oud to begin with. That's kind of what I was expecting when I first got my bottle of Ombre Nomade, was a barnyard oud, but that actually wasn't the case. It is a little bit more earthy, but it's more crowd pleasing than you would actually expect it to be. And it's the same exact vibe with No Shave for Nomad. Very earthy oud that's not too barnyardy. So if you're not a fan of oud, you have nothing to worry about with this fragrance. Of course, yet again, I do have to tell you, this is more synthetic than Ombre Nomad, of course, but you're gonna expect that when you're only paying around $100 compared to $400. They're not gonna use the same natural ingredients in these cologne fragrances. They just can't. They wouldn't be able to make a profit off of it if they tried to. Or they would obviously have to charge more than what they do now at that entry level cost. And this is the same cost as Into the Woods. The 30 ml for $44.99, the 60 ml like I have right here as well for $69.99, or the 100 ml for $119.99. And if you use that code, 15% off of all those prices. You literally cannot beat it. Absolutely the best cologne of Ombre Nomad I have smelled and tested by far, guys. Like literally spot on, just more synthetic and just more fruity from that raspberry. That is about the only difference in the two, which could possibly make Ombre Nomad come across a little bit darker just because the raspberry notes tone down a little bit more in that one compared to this. That just gets straight into the incense and oud. The raspberry in here definitely lasts a lot longer in that opening until it starts to transition into like the mid and then the base. And believe it or not, I've actually been reaching for this over Ombre Nomad much more lately, because like I said earlier, it's hard to justify wasting my bottle of that one when I have this and it smells 95% similar. Now for the performance. So Ombre Nomad's known as basically a beast mode nuclear fragrance, which it is. Even the newer batches, I think my batch is actually a 2023 batch, is fairly brand new. So the performance is still fantastic with Ombre Nomad. No complaints, absolutely above average, almost nuclear. With No Shave for Nomad, it is very similar when it comes to the performance. This is actually more concentrated than Ombre Nomad, being an extrait versus an eau de parfum. And the synthetics is what makes a fragrance perform most of the time. So this one is on par with Ombre Nomad, might even be slightly more beast mode, which is hard to say, man. It actually kind of hurts to say, to be honest, because like I said, I'm a big fan. And Louis Vuitton is probably my favorite designer house. So these cologne companies are coming in, creating fragrances that are nearly identical to Louis Vuitton, with sometimes even better performance. Yeah, that definitely hurts. But the truth's the truth. And of course, I have to tell you the truth. This stuff, it does perform on par, slightly, possibly even better than Ombre Nomad. So you already know if you're buying this, you're gonna get the performance, you're gonna get that Ombre Nomad scent profile, and you're not gonna break the bank. Just honestly a big fan of what they do over at Alexandria Fragrances. Shout out to them. I have reviewed some in the past, like Elysium Cologne, Tiger Cologne, Black Panther, which is probably their most popular within their entire lineup. And you know, Tiger is my signature scent. I reach for Black Panther like all the time, and even wore Black Panther for like a year before getting a bottle of Tiger. So, and still go for Black Panther on non-important occasions, since Tiger is my signature scent. So yeah, spot on colognes, can't beat the prices, can't beat the presentation. It's literally just all a win-win when it comes to these. But that's gonna do it for this review of No Shave for Nomad and Into the Woods. Let me know down below if you want me to review any others. I do have a few other Louis Vuittons from Alexandria Fragrances, so maybe I'll review those down the line. But besides that, leave a like, subscribe below if you haven't already, and you already know I'll see all of you back here in my next upload. Take care, everybody.